Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to join me. I just want to make sure if everyone can see the screen and if everyone can hear me okay. Okay, perfect. I'm going to give it about just another minute because I can see more people are still coming in. If you're unable to stay for the entire time, yes, I will be recording this session. It's recording right now for the ADE community, which I am so delighted to see that there's so many of my peers here. Thank you guys for being here. This is great. It will be recorded and shared in the ADE community, and I will be emailing a link out to all of you as well who signed up with the ticket system so that you can watch it again later if you need to. Okay, perfect. So welcome to my session about designing immersive learning experiences. I'm really delighted to be sharing about this topic, which is incredibly meaningful to me. It's very close to my heart, and I'm delighted to share it this evening. So I know a couple of you have already done this. Please go ahead and type in the chat, just let us know where you're joining from. I did open this up not only to the ADE community, but on the global scale. So it'd be great to know where you're joining us from. And hopefully, you might make some connections. So we've got Norway, we've got New York, we've got the UK, lots from the USA, from Sweden, Ireland, Italy, wow, Croatia. Thank you very much. Wow, big global community here. So thank you very much for the support, and hopefully you'll walk away with some new ideas to try in your classroom. So introductions. My name is Lindsay Stuttard. I'm a member of the ADE class of 2019. I work as a digital teaching and learning specialist for an international school here in the UK. I've been involved in education for 16 years in both the public and the private sectors. The tools I'm going to be referencing are Keynote, Reality Composer, and Tinkercad. I sent out an email to ticket holders today just to make sure you had those downloaded on your iPad because this is a hands-on session, so we will be actively doing things on our iPad. Hopefully you've joined this session from a secondary device and not from your iPad so that you can go ahead and work hands-on today. Just some quick housekeeping. Please do keep yourself muted and make use of the chat. I am monitoring the chat for any questions that come up. And this is being recorded, as I mentioned before, for those that are not able to attend or for staying the whole time. If you want to tweet out during this, by all means, please do. I think it's a powerful way to learn from each other. So if there's anything that you're creating as we're going along, or anything that you're just finding interesting that you want to share with someone else, please do share on Twitter and tag me at linsdive85 and use the hashtag AR on iPad. This is a big one that I know Apple is promoting. So if we can get you tweeting with that, that would be fantastic. So in the workshop today, I'm going to be going through the why and the how when it comes to designing immersive learning experiences. And that's really sort of the meat of the workshop today, is getting you to think a certain way and then how to execute it. Then I'll talk about how you can start to share your immersive experiences with students, especially for those of us like myself here in the UK who are doing distance learning and don't get to see our students face to face, how we can share things out to them. And then at the end, I'll be mentioning some additional resources. If what I mentioned today is just a bit too intense for you to start with, I'll provide some additional resources as sort of a gentler approach to this. But again, please do put questions in the chat. I'll be monitoring that as we go along, and hopefully everything will go smoothly. So first we'll start with the why. And I've given you just a blank piece of paper here. I think this is probably one of the most simply used tools in education. It's always a great fallback, if technology fails us in the classroom, if something goes wrong, but it's also that ubiquitous approach to starting something brand new. You've got a clean slate and you're not entirely sure how it's going to end up with, but you've got a basic starting point. And my purpose of giving you this is to get you to think about this particular question. If you have a blank sheet of paper, what could this become? So take about 5 to 10 seconds and just think about you as an educator, how you could make use of a piece of paper in your classroom for students. So hopefully you have a couple of ideas in your head. When I was thinking about this and when I put a blank piece of paper in front of myself, the things that came to my mind were split into two categories. I was thinking along the lines of productivity, but also along the lines of creativity. So on the productivity side, I could take that piece of paper and I could have students write an essay, or we could put our ideas into a story and tell a story. Or we could organize our thoughts into tools like a timeline or a diagram. Or on the other side, on the creativity side, we could actually just sit and do drawing, or we could go a bit deeper with other tools and create some artwork. Or we could actually physically transform that paper into a piece of origami, or even something simple as a paper plane. And the point of doing this type of activity or this type of exercise is to get you thinking that why you came to this session. You came here with this idea to develop into a true purpose. And so I want you to think now that what is your purpose? What is it that you want to take from this session and actively apply in your classes? If you've heard me speak before, you know that I will always talk about the purposeful use of augmented reality. I think it's very easy sometimes for teachers and educators to get lost in sort of the gimmicky appeal of augmented reality in the class as just a hook to get children engaged. But actually, what is your purpose? Why are you choosing this form of technology over a more traditional approach? So I'm going to give you a minute now on a post-it, on a scrap piece of paper. If you want to draw it, doodle it, however you like, take 1 minute and define what your purpose is for designing an immersive learning experience with augmented reality. Okay, about 10 seconds left. And so the reason I had you actually take it out of your brain and put it down onto a concrete form is that when we have ideas in our head, especially when it comes to a purpose, sometimes if they stay in our head, we don't do anything with them. Whereas if you actually physically write it down, it's there, it's concrete, you can put it somewhere where you can be reminded, but it's also a way of holding yourself accountable, because it's very easy when designing immersive experiences to just get lost in the design, to get lost in how it feels, how the experience is. And you always need to keep yourself grounded to what your purpose is. So hang on to that. We're going to be coming back to that in just a little bit. Now, I work as a specialist, which in some ways is like a coach. And when I sit with teachers and we talk about things in our planning, I try to get them to answer some specific questions. And I mentioned this before about purpose. What is the AR providing? Why use augmented reality over another type of technology tool or just over traditional methods? So what would the AR be providing? And the next two kind of go hand in hand. How can I assess this? And how will I know that the students, have learned the objectives? So there needs to be some form of accountability back from the students to you when using augmented reality. And finally, what will they, again, your students, need to know ahead of time? So when they're going to be doing an AR immersive experience that you design, that you custom make, what will they need to know ahead of time? If it's new resources, will they need to have a trial run of them? If you're customizing any kind of accountability, such as a workbook, Are they going to need to know how that tool works? So it's just important that you think about these things and try and work through any kinks ahead of time so that you're properly prepared. And I'm very much a visual person, as you will come to realize if you don't know that already. And I like to visually put out my planning. I like to draw it. I like to sketch it. I like to see it from pretty much from start to finish. So when we did that activity previously, you've already identified what your purpose is. So in my mind, you're already a quarter of the way there. The next is to think about the design. So what will the first person user experience be like for students? So imagine a student standing outside in the football field with their iPad, and they are physically moving themselves while looking at the iPad screen. And you need to think about, from their perspective, what are they going to be seeing? What are they going to be experiencing? Maybe things that they're hearing, maybe things that they're witnessing happen as animations. What is it going to be like for them? And also in that proxy, what's the layout going to be like? Are they moving in a room, in a defined space, or can they have more freedom to explore beyond a defined space? The next is thinking about the resources, which from this point on, I'm really going to mention just as assets to kind of distinguish. So when I mention assets, things that you're going to be creating from scratch. And then finally, the sharing. How will this get to students, and what ways can accountability be documented? So again, bringing it back full circle, it's great to give students that immersive experience, but then how can you get some form of accountability back from them? So I'm just going to walk through the first steps of what we're going to do, which is to start with a blank keynote presentation. I'm sure there are many happy ADs cheering right now because this is a favorite tool of ours. But we're going to create a blank presentation. And again, get in the habit, if you don't already do this, because I know sometimes we don't hold ourselves accountable, but name the presentation. I've gone ahead and just named it AR Immersive Learning Experience Assets. And what we're going to do with this keynote is two particular things. So the first is going to be the planning aspect. And what we're going to do is plan out our purpose and plan out the start of what kind of content we would add into an immersive learning experience. And I'm doing this with the drawing tools. You can go ahead and just put text in if you want. It's completely up to you. But I'm going to break this down into three different categories. The first is going to be the content. And when I say content, I don't mean the curriculum. I mean the content that you're looking to bring the experience to life. The second is going to be objectives. And this is the learning that you want to see the students give you feedback on from the experience. So what are they learning? And then lastly, the curriculum. And with curriculum, I mean something really specific to your school. So if your school has designed their own curriculum, how are you tying that in? For example, at our school, we have sort of approaches to learning. How am I tying some of that in if it's applicable? And so I'm just going to give you a minute now to go through that process of making your keynote presentation, naming it, and giving that first slide the planning section for content, for objectives, and if it's applicable, a school-specific curriculum. And again, if you have any questions, please do pop them in the chat. I am monitoring this, and I'm happy to answer anything as it comes up. And if you don't finish it this time, that's okay. This is really just to get you started thinking about tying in your actual content and objectives into how you would design this experience. So if you want to come back later on after the session is finished and embellish on that, by all means, please do. This is just a starting point. And so here was what I came up with. For my content, I was basing this experience on the novel study based around the book, The K. If you haven't read it, it's a fantastic book. I read it as a child and it sticks out in my memory. And so it really inspired me for this, this session tonight. And I know that the desert island is very prominent when it comes to the setting. So the desert island is really going to feature heavily in my experience here. I know for a fact I want to include problems and solutions, as those are transformative things that the characters go through in the book. And if possible, I'd like to bring in the themes of racism and changing mindsets, because that is something that the main character in the K has to go through as part of his process. Now, the objectives I've tied to this are from the Common Core. They're just some reading objectives. There's more that I could add into this if I wanted to, but just to give you a starting example, these are ones that I would be tying into this experience, and I would be looking to check that I would be able to have accountability from students on this. There's nothing really tying to my school's particular curriculum, and so therefore I've left that part blank. But the next thing we're going to do is make a second slide in our presentation. And now we're going to start to think about the design in terms of the assets we're going to have to create, because we're starting with a clean slate when it comes to AR, and we're actually building a bespoke experience for the students. And so I'm going to divide this again into 3 columns: assets that are 2-dimensional assets, assets that are 3-dimensional assets, and those are ones I'm going to show you how you can create those on your iPad and bring those into Reality Composer, which is our AR tool. And then the last category is going to be any kind of visuals or questions through the content. So again, things like multiple choice questions, true or false questions, maybe something like a writing prompt, or some form of visual accountability. And so this is how I've chosen to divide it up. This is how it makes sense to me. You may have a different approach. That's completely up to you. But again, I'm going to give you 1 more minute to plan out what your assets would be that you would include based on your content and based on your objectives you're looking for. Okay, just coming to the end of our minute there. So here you can see what I came up with. As I mentioned before, I'm a visual learner, so I like adding little sketches to provide context along with the actual words that I've written. For my 2D assets, I know I'm going to want to make some forms of signs that I can hide around the experience. I know I want to reference text, either conversations that characters have had that I can reference back for the experience. I know I'm going to want to reference the characters themselves, and the water in the ocean is going to play a significant part. So I need to make sure I have a 2D asset for that. Now for 3D assets, and these are ones that I'm going to have to make, are going to include palm trees. The island is going to be quite prominent, so I'm going to have to make that as well as the space for students to explore. I'm going to want to have some bridges in there, and then some little houses just to add to that island feel. Now, this is by no means the end of my list. This is just to give you a starting point of what I would work with and then come back and plan more as things develop. And as I mentioned before, my visuals and content comprehension questions could be multiple choice, true, false, writing prompts, and that visual accountability, where maybe you actually ask students to take a screen recording while they're in the experience, or to take a screenshot of something that you've asked them to locate and upload that back to you as the accountability. And so supporting resources, I know my fellow ADEs will support me in this, in saying that there are some fantastic approaches to using pages, numbers, and Keynote to create your own workbooks for students. I'm blanking right now on who are some of our best creators in the ADE community. So my ADE colleagues, if anyone can think of names, please throw them into the chat for others to follow. But making your own workflows or workbooks is a great way of using pages, numbers, and Keynote for accountability. so that students have a place to work within while they're exploring. And you can divide up the pages quite easily to fit with how you want them to explore. So maybe page 1 is saying, for mine, right, go and explore this section of the island. And when you're done that, record all of your answers into the numbers file, and then you can move on to, page 2 of there. And the last part is follow up. Follow up means that you're providing students the opportunity to have a voice about their experience. We're all going to be starting as learners. This is a really sort of groundbreaking approach to using AR. And so having students give you feedback on how their first person experience went is really quite powerful, because it shows the students that you're open to their suggestions, but that you also want to improve. And so having something like a Google Forms, or maybe a page at the end of their numbers file, as a way of providing you with feedback when they submit their workbook for grading. That's something I think is really quite powerful. And it kind of shows almost an element of vulnerability, that we don't know everything and that we do want to constantly improve. And I see some great names have already been thrown in there, one of whom is already in the session with us tonight. So big shout out to Matt Pullen. It looks like he's getting a lot of press down here. And so now we take it to starting to visualize what it could be. And so this is just a little sketch I did in Keynote, again, adding another slide in, and really starting to think about, now how will it look? Now that I've got my content and objectives, now that I know what kind of assets I want to have, now that the experience is really starting to be pictured in my mind, now I need to think about, how am I going to actually build it? How is the layout going to work? So I've just done a very simple little drawing here in Keynote to start to visualize how the experience will be for students. And so please make another slide. Go ahead and use the drawing tools in Keynote, but go ahead and start sketching it out. Even if it's just very, very basic and it doesn't have any colors, please go ahead and just start sketching out what your experience is going to look like for students. And again, this is just preliminary sketching. All 3 of those slides that we've created so far, you're welcome to come back and continue planning before you do any of the creating. Excuse me. And so now that we've done that heavy lifting ahead of time, now we can focus on the hows. How are we actually going to make this? How on earth can we bring what we've written down or what we've sketched to life? And this is, for me, this is the really exciting part. So I hope you'll carry on with me and I won't lose anyone at this point. So we take our initial sort of planning of what the assets are, and then we've done our sort of preliminary drawing. So we have an idea of what we want to create and how we think we want it to look, so that it can end up looking like that. And I'm sure you're looking at that and going, there is absolutely no way I can make something like that, but I'm here to sort of hold your hand and guide you through this process. And I will be showing you how that experience that you're seeing on the far right looks at the very end of this session. So again, back to Keynote. Keynote is a great place to do your drawings, to bring in text boxes, to add shapes and clip art and photos. And the beautiful thing with Keynote is by using split screen on the iPad, when Reality Composer, which is the AR app, is open, you can have Keynote sort of hovering above Reality Composer, and you can simply drag and drop any of the things that you've made into the AR file. And that's really a very simple approach that I learned how to do and has saved me a tremendous amount of time. And so at this point, I'd like you to take some time, 2 minutes, to start drawing or start bringing in shapes to make one of your 2D assets that you had planned for. And a quick little tip, if you want to make any text boxes from Keynote to be brought into AR with Reality Composer, the text box must be attached to a shape, to an image, to something. Reality Composer will not accept just text boxes. It has to be attached to something. And that shape, if you attach it to just a shape, you can have that shape with no fill and no border, and that's completely fine. It just needs to recognize that there's something there beyond just the text box. So 2 minutes now, use Keynote. If you want to get really, really creative and blast through a bunch of your 2D assets now, by all means, but at least get one completed. And just a reminder, if you do have any questions as we're progressing through this, please do make use of the chat. Okay, so hopefully you're finishing up at least one 2D asset that you can use. And so we're going to switch gears now. Now we're going to think about 3D. And this is probably where people get anxious and start to feel like I don't know what I'm doing. I have chosen to use Tinkercad because I think it is a great sort of preliminary start to 3D design. For those that are not familiar with Tinkercad, it is one of the more popular tools for introduction to design and technology, which then lends itself to things like 3D printing. But for me, it's been sort of a gold mine to create three-dimensional assets that I can then play around with in augmented reality. And it's really very simple to use. So we're just going to go through that now. When you come in, you will click to create a new design. And then it gives you sort of a blank workspace to play around with. You've got basic shapes on the side that you can merge together. There's more hidden in the menus that you can go through, and you can mix and match these. But the one I really think is quite powerful is called Scribble. And if you tap on it and then tap on that workspace, what it allows you to do is free draw to make a three-dimensional asset that you can bring in. And this really helps for teachers who go, I really wish I could have that. And now you can go ahead and start to create your own, whether it's drawing it as one whole thing or whether it's making it piece by piece at a time and basically constructing it like a 3D jigsaw. So for one of my 3D assets, I said I was just going to make a palm tree. And I ended up using a very different palm tree for my final design, but this is just to illustrate how simple this tool is. And you'll notice that I'm coloring it in. And the reason that is because if I don't, it just ends up as an outline that's hollow inside. And I want to make sure that this is completely filled in. And so just coloring it in will help with doing that. I haven't found a quicker way to fill it in. So if anyone knows, please do throw it in the chat. But other than just coloring it, that seems to be the best way. And so once it's finished, you click out and then it will create that asset for you. And so now you can see my design has become 3-dimensional, and you've got those white boxes that you can manipulate its depth, and then arrows that you can rotate it on its axes. So on the X, on the Y, or on the Z. Now you want to make sure that it doesn't sit inside the plane, that you bring it back up so it's like it's sitting on a tabletop. And then you can go ahead and start to play around with its size or change the color and that sort of thing. And once you're happy with your 3D asset that you've made, I do recommend changing the name. These come through with some sort of standard text that's in there. And so I like to change the name. And I would click in the top right corner, you can see there's import, export, and send to. And what I would do with this, now that I'm finished and I know I want to use it again, I'm going to tap on export. And it gives you different file options. And the one that we're going to be exporting as is as USDZ files. And these are files that AR apps are able to read to keep your item as a 3D asset. And when you export it, I typically on my iPad will save to my Reality Composer file, so I know where it is. But if you're working in a particular project in mind, you can absolutely just make your own folder and bring all your assets in there if it's easier for you to find. And then you can bring those into Reality Composer later on. So 2 minutes, again, have a go making one of your 2D assets. I have a feeling probably some of you are already off and away designing now, but it can be using Scribble or it can be using the different 3D shapes. Kara's just made a great point that you can drag keynote shapes into Tinkercad. Now, I saw that, and I think it has to be exported and brought into an SVG file converter before it can then be changed as a 3D asset in Tinkercad. I could be wrong, but I was looking into this earlier this week. So yeah, the fact that you could export some of your clip art shapes or so on from Keynote would be really great. Yeah, see, that was my thing too. I was thinking, oh, it can't be that simple, just drag and drop. But no, I had to convert the file to an SVG before it would then make it as a 3D asset. But thank you for bringing that up. That's a good tip. Okay, so hopefully you've been able to at least have a play around with Tinkercad as a starting point, even if you haven't been able to fully make something or to export yet. And so now we come to the final piece, Reality Composer. And just some quick words of advice about Reality Composer based on my experience. Reality Composer does have a native collection of 3D assets that you can use. But what I've realized is actually better to make your own. And that's because if you share a Reality Composer file with students and they have a different version of Reality Composer than you do, or their asset library is not up to date with the native stuff that's in there, some of the items will just disappear from the experience. So I've got to the point now where I tend not to use too much of the Reality Composer stuff, and I use a lot of my own. But when you go in, you're going to create a new project, And there's lots of different anchor options, but we're going to choose horizontal. So it's going to be just sort of a flat horizontal experience. And you can take out the stuff that comes in there natively. And what we're going to do is click the plus. And that's up in the top corner, and click on the plus again. And now we can access our USDZ files that we've made and that are saved in our files. And so I've just brought this one in that I've used in the experience. You've got different tools to change the size of it, to move with the arrows along the X, the Y, and the Z axis. And then obviously when nothing is selected, you can rotate around and see how it looks. Now, the other thing I'm going to do, I do like using the shapes. I think the shapes are quite good just for basic things. So I had mentioned before I was going to do signs, and I had initially thought, oh, I'll do 2D signs, but then I thought, well, I'll just go ahead and make 3D ones. And so using the shapes, you can manipulate them. You can change the color of them natively in Reality Composer. And so for this one, I've just gone ahead and made sort of a flattened cube. And then I can bring text in. So this is what I was talking about before, of having Keynote just sort of hovering on top. Then you can see I've got a text box with a shape underneath. And it's just that simple, just dragging and dropping from Keynote. You can see it's now sitting in the back. The size comes through. You can change that quite easily. Resize it using those rings, or go into the editing feature and change the size that way. And then change the ring so that you can rotate and get it to stand upright. And so there we are. That was my first sort of question that I'd planned for as a text box that I can now bring in while it's grouped with just a clear shape from Keynote. And so now we arrive at the finished product, not fully finished, but just to give you an idea. And I want to give a massive shout out to Owen, who graciously gave up some of his time this week to compose a piece of music for me as background music to this experience. And so the one that I had initially planned out, had done a brief sketch of, and then started to make, here is what it looks like. I'm hoping that the sound will come through okay. So you could just imagine students bringing this up on their iPads, being outside or being in a bigger space, maybe even at home in their gardens, where they can walk through this island, feel like an explorer, and come across the different tasks that they have to complete. And it really is sort of that first-person experience that I was referencing. Now it hopefully will make sense what I was talking about from the student perspective. And this is by far one of the more complicated ones that I've developed. It's not even fully finished yet, but you can see it gives the illusion that the ocean is going on for miles and miles and miles, and you really are on this island. And thankfully, this music as background music, which I'm happy to explain to anyone who wants to know how this works, is on a loop. So it should just carry on playing around in the background as students are exploring and moving. But yeah, this is really starting from that initial purpose that I want my students to feel what it was like to be there as the characters in the K, and then complete the different tasks that relate to the objectives. So massive shout out to Owen. Thank you so much for composing that for me. It's truly, truly wonderful. And really quick, because I know we're just sort of hopefully not going to run out of Zoom time, and I apologize if that happens. Sharing. Now, the best way I found to do this is either to have a shared iCloud folder with students, or to share it to them through Notes. And the nice thing with Notes is you can kind of lump a bunch of files in there. So for my teacher who made a Mesopotamia escape room, she put the Reality Composer file and a numbers file together in a note and was able to share that to the students. And when they click on that file and open it with Reality Composer, they can see the experience just as she designed it. But if for some reason they move something or they delete something on accident, it's not a problem. They can go right back to notes and they can open it up again. And so that was a really nice way of having everything sort of collated in one place, really quite visual. And if they make any mistakes, they can come back and reopen a new copy, deleting the old one. So we're just sort of coming up to the end of the session now. I wanted to share with you some additional resources to help you if you're thinking about this is great, this is really too much for me, and I need something simpler to start with. Shameless plug, here are some of my publications. So I have Exploring the Alphabet with AR, which is using an app called AR Maker to make an alphabet hunt for kids. I have What Makes Me Me, which is using the power of animation in Keynote combined with an app like iJack that brings your animations to life when you scan a trigger image. I've also documented my very first 25 days of AR in the book, My Journey Through Augmented Reality. And lastly, my most recent publication, which ties very much to this content that we've talked about today, Building an Augmented Reality Escape Room for Education. Now, the bottom three have to do with another one of my favorite AR apps, which is an app called Scavenger for making AR scavenger hunts. And all three of those books, you can either get on the iBook store, or you can ask me for the link if they're not showing up. Actually, all the books you can get on the iBook store for free. And the developers of Scavenger were happy to provide me with just a quick little showing of their products. And you can, now that you can make 2D and 3D assets, you can now customize using this app and make your own AR scavenger hunt using those types of tools. And this is another great one for distance learning, because if students have the app, all you have to do is share the link. They can launch the hunt at home. So this is a really great one. And if anyone wants the contact details for the developers, I'm happy to share that as well. Another great one that I mentioned before is AR Maker. The only downside with AR Maker is, as of right now, they don't allow you to share out anything that you make in the app. It'll save natively to the app within the device, but you don't have any ability to make something as a scene, such as this one that I've made for coding, and be able to share that with students. So I'm hoping that they will change that in the future, because I do think it's a really great app, especially for early childhood and primary, and being able to set up a scene that you could send to those children with a very simple interface, that would be fantastic. But this is a great one if you're just looking to get started. And again, we'll use your own 2D assets that you can make. Just to wrap up, here's my email. So if you have other questions, or as you're starting to go through this process to design and you get stuck, you have troubleshooting, you can email me or you can message me on Twitter. And please do check out my website as well for additional support or information. And thank you very much.